Dr. Kim Mina's heart pounded as the massive doors of the Galactic Tribunal slid open with a thunderous hiss. The energy shackles around her wrists hummed with alien technology, their blue glow casting eerie shadows on her face. She had never imagined she would stand here as a prisoner, facing the most powerful court in the known galaxy. The courtroom stretched before her like a cathedral made of living metal. Towering columns twisted upward into darkness, their surfaces rippling with data streams from 1,000 worlds. Floating platforms held delegates from dozens of species, each more bizarre than the last. Some were crystalline beings that chimed like wind bells when they moved. Others were clouds of sentient gas that shifted colors with their emotions. Mechanical entities with multiple arms whirred and clicked as they processed information at impossible speeds. At the center of it all sat Judge Vextar on his elevated throne. The Saurian's golden scales caught the light from the quantum processors overhead, making him look like an ancient dragon from Earth's myths. His yellow eyes were cold and calculating as they fixed on Mina. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber with the authority of someone who had decided the fate of entire civilizations. Human designation, Kim Mina of the third planet Sol system, he began, his forked tongue flicking out as he pronounced each word with disgust. You stand accused of the most serious crime against galactic law, primitive interference with quantum consciousness technology aboard Station Omega-7. The accusation hit Mina like a physical blow. Around the courtroom, alien delegates leaned forward in their hovering seats. A group of 6-armed hexapods drummed their claws against their platforms in what she recognized as their version of applause. The crystalline Nexari began their harmonic, chiming, a sound that usually meant agreement but now felt like mockery. Your Honor, Mina tried to speak, but her voice seemed small in the vast chamber. If you would just let me explain what really happened. Silence! Vextar's roar shook the metal walls. Your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. The quantum consciousness matrices aboard our stations have been running for 10,000 years. The very idea that a human could understand such technology is not just impossible, it is insulting to every advanced species in this tribunal. Behind the judge, holographic displays showed footage from Station Omega-7. Mina watched herself moving through the station's quantum core chamber, her hands dancing over control panels that most aliens needed decades of training to operate. To the tribunal, it looked like a primitive trying to fix a star engine with stone tools. The ethereal ambassador, a being of pure energy contained in a shimmering field, pulsed with what Mina knew was amusement. The human claims she was helping. The creature's voice whispered directly into everyone's minds, like a child claims to help by breaking valuable things. Nervous laughter rippled through the alien delegates. A group of machine beings called constructs processed the joke through their databanks and emitted mechanical sounds that passed for humor among their kind. Even the usually serious Vorthak, massive creatures that looked like walking mountains, rumbled with what might have been laughter. Mina felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. She had spent her entire life studying consciousness and quantum mechanics. Her work had been published in journals across Earth and the colonial worlds. But here, surrounded by aliens who saw her as nothing more than an evolved ape, all her achievements meant nothing. The evidence is clear, Vextar continued, gesturing to the holographic displays. This human somehow gained access to our most sensitive systems. Her clumsy attempts at manipulation nearly caused a cascade failure that could have destroyed the entire station. 3 million beings live and work on Station Omega-7. This creature's ignorance almost killed them all. The weight of those words settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. 3 million lives. Mina had known the station was huge, but hearing the number spoken aloud made her realize just how serious the situation had become. She tried again to speak, to explain what she had actually been trying to prevent, but Vextar silenced her with a wave of his clawed hand. The punishment for such reckless endangerment is clear, the judge declared. Neural reconditioning. We will remove these dangerous delusions from the human's mind. She will be returned to her species with her memories, altered to prevent future interference with technology beyond her comprehension. The Nexari delegates chimed their approval, their crystalline bodies ringing like bells. The constructs whirred with satisfaction as their processors confirmed the legal precedent. Even species that Mina had never seen before were nodding their various heads, tentacles, or optical sensors in agreement. As the judgment was pronounced, security drones descended from the ceiling. Their sleek metal bodies hummed with containment fields as they surrounded Mina. She looked up at Judge Vextar one last time, seeing nothing but cold certainty in his reptilian features. "Take her to the reconditioning chambers," Vextar commanded. "Let this serve as a warning to all primitive species who think they can meddle with forces beyond their understanding." The security drones hummed as they guided Mina through the long corridors of the tribunal station. Their metal bodies gleamed under the pulsing lights that lined the walls, each step echoing through the vast hallways filled with alien architecture. Mina kept her head down, still feeling the sting of humiliation from the courtroom. Behind them, the massive doors sealed shut with a sound like thunder. In the records chamber deep within the station, Junior Clerk Talbeth was having the worst day of his short career. The young Nexari's crystalline body flickered between pale blue and nervous yellow as he tried to organize the mountain of case files that had piled up during the trial. His supervisor had left him with strict instructions to catalog everything before the next shift arrived. Talbeth's 6 crystal arms moved in practiced motions, sorting through data chips and holographic records. Each document glowed softly in his transparent hands before being filed into the proper storage matrix. The work was boring, but it paid for his studies at the Galactic Academy. As the youngest member of his species ever to work at the tribunal, he couldn't afford to make mistakes. That's when disaster struck. While reaching for a particularly high stack of files, Talbeth's elbow joint caught the edge of a personal data scanner. The device tumbled through the air, its sensors activating as it fell. By pure chance, it landed directly on Kim Mina's personal information chip, which had been left on the desk after the trial proceedings. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," Talbeth muttered in his native harmonic language, diving to catch the scanner before it could cause more chaos. But it was too late. The device had already begun its deep scan protocol, and information was flooding across every display screen in the chamber. At first, Talbeth saw what he expected to see. Basic identification data, travel records, the usual information that came with any defendant. Kim Mina, age 34, born on Earth in the Sol system. Nothing unusual there. Most humans who got into trouble with galactic law were exactly what they appeared to be, primitive beings who had wandered too far from their home system. But then the academic records began to appear. Talbeth's crystal matrix started to pulse with confusion as line after line of credentials scrolled past. His optical sensors. Bachelor's degree in quantum physics from Seoul National University with highest honors. Master's degree in consciousness studies with a thesis that had been cited over 50,000 times. Doctoral dissertation titled The Quantum Nature of a Sentient Thought that had revolutionized how 3 different species understood their own minds. "This can't be right," Talbeth whispered, his voice creating small chiming sounds in the empty chamber. The scanner must be malfunctioning. Humans didn't have academic achievements like this. Everyone knew they were barely capable of understanding their own primitive technology, let alone making contributions to galactic science. But the data kept coming. Publications in 17 different languages, including several that Talbeth recognized as being incredibly difficult for non-native speakers to master. Research papers that had been translated into over 40 alien dialects. Citations numbering not in the thousands, but in the millions. Each achievement seemed more impossible than the last. Then Talbeth saw something that made his entire crystal body freeze in place. Consciousness Bridge Theory, primary author Kim Mina. The scanner fell from his trembling hands, clattering onto the metal floor. For a moment, the only sound in the chamber was the soft humming of the station's life support systems and the distant murmur of voices from other parts of the tribunal complex. Consciousness Bridge Theory. Every advanced species in the galaxy knew that name. It was the theoretical framework that had finally solved the ancient paradox of artificial consciousness, the question of whether machines could truly think or just pretend to think. The theory had been studied in universities across 1,000 worlds. It had led to breakthroughs in AI development that had transformed entire civilizations. Talbeth had studied the theory himself during his education. His professors had spoken of its mysterious author with the kind of reverence usually reserved for ancient philosophers or legendary scientists. The being who had created this work was considered one of the greatest minds in galactic history. There were species that had built entire religious movements around the principles outlined in the theory, and that being was currently being escorted to neural reconditioning chambers as a common criminal. Talbeth's crystal form began to shift through rapid color changes: blue confusion, yellow fear, red panic. His optical sensors darted around the chamber, as if looking for someone to tell him this was all some elaborate joke. But the data on the screens didn't lie. Quantum encrypted academic records couldn't be faked, especially not at this level of detail. The young clerk's hands shook as he pulled up more information. Research grants from the most prestigious institutions in human space, speaking engagements at conferences attended by the galaxy's top scientists, awards and honors that would make even elder Nexari scholars jealous. This wasn't just any human academic. This was someone whose work had literally changed how the galaxy understood consciousness itself. And then the most shocking discovery of all appeared on the screen. A recent research paper, published just 6 months ago, titled Cascade Failure Prevention in Quantum Consciousness Matrices. The abstract described theoretical methods for detecting and preventing exactly the kind of system failures that could destroy large-scale consciousness networks. Talbeth's crystal matrix pulsed with sudden understanding. Kim Mina hadn't been trying to sabotage Station Omega-7. She had been trying to save it. Her actions in the quantum core weren't the clumsy interference of a primitive being. They were the precise movements of someone who understood these systems better than almost anyone else in the galaxy. The magnitude of the tribunal's mistake hit Talbeth like a physical blow. They were about to destroy the mind of one of the galaxy's greatest thinkers. Worse, they were doing it out of pure prejudice and ignorance. Talbeth's trembling fingers moved across his communication panel, accessing the tribunal's emergency network. This information had to reach the delegates immediately, before it was too late. As he began uploading the data, alarms started blaring throughout the station. Other clerks and officials would see this information within minutes. The truth was finally coming to light, but would it be in time to save Kim Mina? The emergency data burst shot through Station Omega-7's quantum networks like lightning through copper wire. In seconds, the information reached every embassy, every delegation chamber, and every government office on the massive space station. What had started as a routine criminal case was about to become the most embarrassing mistake in galactic diplomatic history. In the ethereal embassy, Ambassador Fluxara was reviewing trade agreements when the data stream hit his consciousness. Like a meteor, the gaseous being's shimmering form suddenly contracted into a tight spiral of pure shock. His energy patterns flickered through colors that had no names in any solid species language. "Impossible," Fluxara whispered, his voice rippling through the embassy's atmosphere like disturbed water. "This cannot be the same being." But as he accessed his species' historical archives, the truth became undeniable. 23 years ago, the ethereal civilization had faced its greatest crisis. Their people had evolved beyond physical form centuries earlier, uploading their consciousness into vast digital networks that spanned their home system. It had seemed like the perfect solution, immortal minds free from the limitations of flesh. Then the fragmentation began. Without warning, ethereal minds started breaking apart in the digital realm. Ancient philosophers became confused children. Scientists forgot their own discoveries. Entire family networks dissolved as consciousness patterns scattered like smoke in the wind. Within months, their species was facing digital extinction. The solution had come from an impossible source, a young human academic whose theoretical work on consciousness bridges had provided the key to stabilizing their digital minds. Kim Mina's quantum consciousness equations had saved billions of ethereal lives. Their species had honored her with their highest award, the Golden Nebula of Eternal Gratitude, though they had never met her in person. Fluxara's gaseous form pulsed, with horror as he realized what was happening. The woman who had saved his entire species was being led to neural reconditioning as a common criminal. His energy patterns shifted to the deep red of emergency as he activated his embassy's fastest communication systems. 3 levels down in the Nexari Cultural Center, Elder Zixoth was conducting a meditation session when the data wave crashed through their collective consciousness. The ancient Nexari's crystalline body resonated with such powerful harmonics that every piece of crystal art in the chamber began to sing in response. "All minds, cease meditation," Zixoth commanded, their voice creating complex musical patterns that conveyed both urgency and amazement. "Access the archives immediately. Search for the designation Flesh Philosopher." The younger Nexari in the chamber flickered with confusion. The Flesh Philosopher was a legendary figure in their society, someone whose writings had transformed how their hive mind species understood individual thought within collective consciousness. Most Nexari believed the philosopher was a myth, a story created to explain concepts too advanced for ancient minds to have developed naturally. As the archives opened, the truth blazed across their shared consciousness like a supernova. Kim Mina of Earth was not just real. She was the mysterious author whose work had revolutionized their entire social structure. Her theories on individual nodes within collective intelligence had allowed the Nexari to maintain personal identity while sharing thoughts across their species. "She taught us that being connected doesn't mean losing ourselves," Zixoth whispered, their crystal bodies shifting through colors of deep reverence. "The tribunal is about to destroy the mind that saved our culture from dissolution." The elders' harmonics reached a frequency that triggered emergency protocols throughout the Nexari section of the station. Within minutes, every Nexari diplomat, scientist, and cultural representative was accessing the devastating news. In the Saurian Command Center, Technical Director Korvanth was running diagnostics on the Tribunal Station's security systems when the information burst appeared on his screens. The massive reptilian's golden scales shifted to pale yellow as he read the data. His clawed hands trembled as he accessed his species' most classified archives. "By the sacred stars," Korvanth breathed, his voice barely a whisper in the vast Technical Center. "This cannot be accurate, but the quantum-encrypted files didn't lie. Every advanced AI system in the Saurian fleet, from the navigation computers on their smallest scouts to the vast artificial minds that controlled their planet-sized dreadnoughts, was built on theoretical foundations created by Kim Mina Korvanth's." Scales continued to shift colors as he pulled up schematic after schematic, the consciousness matrices that allowed their AIs to think independently while remaining loyal to their creators. The quantum processing cores that made their computers faster than anything else in the galaxy. The neural networks that gave their robotic armies tactical intelligence beyond any other species' military forces. All of it traced back to the work of a human woman who was currently being escorted to have her mind wiped clean. "Every quantum processor in our fleet runs on her consciousness matrices," Korvanth whispered to his assistant, a younger Saurian whose scales had turned completely white with shock. "Our entire technological superiority depends on theories created by the being we just condemned as primitive." The technical director's claws flew over his control panels as he accessed the tribunal's emergency communication network. This information had to reach Judge Vextar immediately, before an irreversible mistake destroyed one of the galaxy's greatest minds. Across the station, similar scenes were playing out in dozens of embassy chambers and government offices. The Construct delegation discovered that their latest artificial consciousness upgrades were based on Kim Mina's research. The Vorthak Military Command realized that their tactical AI systems used her theories to coordinate their mountain-sized warriors. Even species that had never heard of humans before were finding connections to the woman's work in their own technological advancement. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came from the tribunal's own archives. The station's quantum consciousness core, the system that managed life support, gravity, and environmental controls for 3 million beings, had been upgraded just 5 years earlier using consciousness matrix technology based entirely on Kim Mina's theoretical work. The woman they were punishing for interfering with their technology had actually created the foundations that made their technology possible. As the truth spread through the station like ripples in a pond, a new emotion began to replace the shock and disbelief. It started as embarrassment among the younger delegates, grew into concern among the scientists and scholars, and finally crystallized into something approaching panic among the senior officials. They had made a mistake. Not just any mistake, but the kind of catastrophic error that would be remembered in history books for thousands of years. The greatest mind of the current galactic age was walking toward neural reconditioning, and they had less than an hour to stop it before the damage became irreversible. The station's communication networks blazed with emergency transmissions as every major species tried to contact Judge Vexitar at once, but the Saurian judge was in his private chambers, preparing the legal documents for Kim Mina's reconditioning, completely unaware that his world was about to turn upside down. The first emergency alert reached Judge Vexitar while he was reviewing the neural reconditioning protocols in his private chambers. The massive Saurian barely glanced at the flashing red light on his communication panel, assuming it was another routine administrative matter. He had more important things to focus on, like ensuring the human's dangerous delusions were properly erased from her mind. But the alerts kept coming. First one, then 5, then dozens. His chamber's walls lit up with incoming priority messages from every major species delegation on the station. The holographic displays around his desk blazed with urgent communication requests, each marked with the highest diplomatic priority codes. By the ancient scales, Vexitar muttered, his golden hide rippling with annoyance. What catastrophe could possibly require this much attention? When he finally opened the first message, his reptilian features froze in disbelief. The data that flooded his screens made his claws dig deep grooves into his metal desk. Academics. Records, research papers, citations, awards, all bearing the name of the human he had just condemned to neural reconditioning. His private door chimed with the sound of someone demanding immediate entry. Before Vexitar could respond, Ambassador Fluxara's gaseous form flowed through the air vents like liquid light. The ethereal's energy patterns were pulsing with colors that Vexitar had never seen before, deep purples and blazing oranges that spoke of urgent crisis. Judge Vexitar, Fluxara's voice resonated through the chamber like thunder. You must halt the reconditioning procedure immediately. The human you condemned is— I know what she is, Vexitar interrupted, his voice barely controlled. The judge's scales had shifted to a sickly green color that among Saurians indicated deep shame. The question is how we proceed without destroying what remains of our diplomatic credibility. Within minutes, Vexitar's chambers had become a war room. Elder Zixoth materialized through the station's quantum transport system, their crystalline body chiming with harmonics of extreme urgency. Technical Director Korovanth arrived with a team of Saurian engineers, their portable computers blazing with evidence of the tribunal's catastrophic mistake. The reconditioning chamber is already preparing, Korovanth reported, his own scales pale with fear. The neural scanners have begun mapping her consciousness patterns. If we don't stop this within the next 30 minutes, the process becomes irreversible. Vexitar's claws slammed against his desk, sending sparks flying from the metal surface. Cancel the procedure, bring her back to the main courtroom, send emergency summons to every delegate on this station. If we're going to humiliate ourselves, we might as well do it properly. The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. Emergency shuttles launched from every embassy, carrying delegates who had been scattered across the station's vast structure. The main courtroom's automated systems worked overtime to reconfigure seating for species that hadn't planned to attend. Translator systems overloaded as dozens of different languages filled the air with urgent conversations. When Kim Mina was finally escorted back into the courtroom, she immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. Where before there had been contempt and dismissal, now there was something that looked almost like fear. The alien delegates watched her with expressions she couldn't quite read, but their body language spoke of beings who had realized they were in serious trouble. Judge Vexitar looked like he had aged a decade in the past few hours. His golden scales had lost their luster, and his yellow eyes couldn't quite meet Mina's gaze as she was brought to stand before his bench. The energy shackles were still around her wrists, but somehow they felt less threatening now. Dr. Kim, Vextar began, and Mina noticed immediately that he had used her title instead of the dismissive human designation from before. His voice was strained, as if each word was being forced out against his will. "We have reviewed your credentials. It appears there may have been some oversights in our initial assessment of your case." Mina raised an eyebrow. Around the courtroom, she could see alien delegates shifting nervously in their seats. The crystalline Nexari were producing soft, nervous chimes. The mechanical constructs were processing data at visible speeds, their optical sensors flickering rapidly. "Perhaps," Vextar continued, his voice getting stronger as he forced himself to continue, "you could explain your actions aboard Station Omega-7 in more detail than we previously allowed." For the first time since this nightmare began, Mina allowed herself a small smile. The change in the judge's tone told her everything she needed to know. Somehow someone had discovered who she really was. "Certainly, Your Honor," she said calmly. "I was conducting research in the station's quantum consciousness archives when I detected unusual pattern fluctuations in the core matrix. The signatures matched theoretical models I developed 15 years ago for my paper on cascade failure, prevention in large-scale consciousness networks." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Every translator had stopped working as the aliens strained to understand her words without electronic assistance. "What you interpreted as primitive interference was actually an emergency stabilization procedure," Mina continued. "I recognized the early warning signs of a consciousness cascade failure and implemented countermeasures to prevent system collapse." Ambassador Fluxara's gaseous form pulsed with urgent colors as he leaned forward in his hovering platform. "Dr. Kim, this cascade failure, could it have affected the entire station?" Mina nodded grimly. "The quantum breach was building toward critical mass. Based on my calculations, you had approximately 6 hours before the cascade reached the point of no return. Once that happened, the consciousness void would have expanded exponentially, destroying every AI system, uploaded mind and digital consciousness within a 50 light-year radius." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Elder Zixoth's crystalline body resonated with harmonics of pure horror. Technical Director Korvanth's scales shifted through rapid color changes as the implications sank in. Even the usually stoic constructs began producing mechanical sounds that indicated extreme distress. 3 million beings live on Station Omega-7, Vextar whispered, his voice barely audible. "The ethereal embassy alone houses over 50,000 uploaded consciousnesses. The Nexari Collective maintains a hive mind link for their entire delegation. If what you're saying is true, it would have been the greatest disaster in recorded galactic history," Mina finished quietly. "And instead of thanking me for preventing it, you decided to wipe my mind because you couldn't believe a human was capable of understanding your technology." The chamber fell into absolute silence. The weight of their mistake pressed down on every being present, like the gravity of a collapsed star. They had come within hours of destroying the mind of the woman who had just saved millions of lives, and they had done it purely out of prejudice and arrogance. Judge Vextar's head bowed until his massive skull nearly touched his desk. Around the courtroom, alien delegates stared at their hands, tentacles, or optical sensors, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The reckoning had begun. The morning sun of Station Omega-7's artificial star streamed through the massive windows of the newly constructed Human Institute for Consciousness Studies. Dr. Kim Suajin adjusted her presentation materials one final time, taking a deep breath as she looked out at what would soon be the most diverse audience in galactic history. 3 months had passed since the tribunal incident that had nearly ended in disaster. The aftermath had been swift and dramatic. Judge Vextar had not only dismissed all charges against Kim Mina, but had personally apologized before the full Galactic Council. The embarrassment had been so complete that several species had demanded immediate reforms to prevent similar prejudice-based mistakes in the future. But the real change had come from an unexpected source. Ambassador Fluxara, speaking for the Ethereal Collective, had proposed something unprecedented: the establishment of a human-led research institute dedicated to consciousness studies. The proposal had been met with skepticism at first, But as more species came forward with stories of how human research had secretly benefited their civilizations, support had grown rapidly. Now, as Swajin prepared for the Institute's inaugural lecture, the auditorium was filling with beings from across the galaxy. The front rows were reserved for official delegates, but behind them sat researchers, philosophers, scientists, and curious minds from dozens of different species. The Nexari delegation had arrived early, their crystalline bodies creating a rainbow of light as they resonated with excitement. Elder Zixoth occupied a place of honor, their ancient form glowing with soft blue harmonics that indicated deep anticipation. Beside them, a group of younger Nexari scholars prepared their shared consciousness networks to record every word of the lecture. The ethereal embassy had sent a full diplomatic team, with Ambassador Fluxara leading a group of the galaxy's most renowned digital philosophers. Their gaseous forms swirled in complex patterns that served as their version of animated conversation. The air above their section shimmered with barely contained energy as they discussed the implications of what they were about to witness. Even the proud Saurians had come in force. Technical Director Corvanth had brought his entire research team, their golden and silver scales creating a metallic sea in the auditorium's middle section. Most surprising of all, Judge Vexitar himself sat in the front row, a portable datapad in his clawed hands as he prepared to take notes like any common student. The mechanical constructs had created a section of their own, their multiple arms, and optical sensors creating a forest of gleaming metal. Their leader, Processing Unit Zeta 9, had publicly stated that this lecture would be transmitted in real time to every construct world in their network. For a species that valued logic above all else, their presence was a remarkable show of respect. As the appointed time arrived, Suajin walked to the podium with steady steps. The auditorium fell silent, thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and consciousness, patterns focusing on the single human figure at the center of the stage. Honored delegates, distinguished colleagues, and curious minds from across the galaxy, Swajin began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustic systems. Today marks not just the opening of this institute, but the beginning of a new chapter in how we understand consciousness itself. She gestured to the diverse crowd before her, her movements confident and natural. For too long we have approached consciousness as if it were a competition. Whose minds are faster? Whose thoughts are more complex? Whose intelligence is superior? But consciousness isn't a race to be won. It's a symphony to be played together. The Nexari began to chime softly, their harmonic responses indicating deep interest. Swajin smiled at the sound, having learned to interpret their musical language during her months of preparation. Consider the ethereal approach to consciousness, she continued, nodding toward Ambassador Fluxara's section. You have transcended physical form, becoming pure thought and energy. Your perspective on digital consciousness has taught us that the mind can exist independently of flesh and bone. Fluxara's gaseous form pulsed with colors of appreciation and pride. The Nexari have shown us the beauty of collective consciousness, Swajin said, turning toward Elder Zixoth. Your ability to share thoughts while maintaining individual identity has revolutionized our understanding of what it means to be both one and many at the same time. The crystalline being's chimes grew more complex, creating harmonies that filled the air with music, and the constructs have demonstrated that consciousness can emerge from pure logic and mathematics, she added, looking toward the mechanical section. Your artificial minds prove that intelligence isn't limited to biological origins. Processing Unit Zeta 9's optical sensors flashed in what Swajin had learned was their equivalent of applause. But what about humans, she asked, her voice growing stronger. What unique perspective do we bring to this galactic conversation about consciousness? The auditorium was completely silent now, every being focused on her words. Humanity's gift to the galaxy is our ability to exist in the spaces between, Swajin explained. We are neither purely logical nor purely emotional. We are not collective minds, but we are not completely individual either. We exist in the bridge between all these states. She activated a holographic display that showed complex patterns of neural activity. Human consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. We can use cold logic to solve mathematical problems while feeling deep emotional connections to abstract concepts. We can work as individuals while instinctively understanding our place in larger communities. Judge Vextar's claws moved rapidly across his datapad, his golden scales shimmering with concentration as he absorbed every word. This is why human research has been able to contribute to so many different approaches to consciousness, Suajin continued. We can understand the ethereal perspective because we dream and imagine. We can appreciate Nexari collective thinking because we form families and societies. We can work with construct logic because we build tools and solve problems. The lecture continued for over an hour, with Suajin explaining complex theories in language that every species could understand. She spoke about the quantum nature of thought, the mathematics of emotion, and the physics of creativity. She demonstrated how different types of consciousness could work together to solve problems that no single approach could handle alone. As she neared the end of her presentation, Suajin looked out at the diverse crowd with genuine warmth. The sight of so many different species gathered together to learn filled her with hope for the galaxy's future. The universe is vast and full of mysteries that none of us can solve alone, she said. But together, with our different ways of thinking and understanding, we can unlock secrets that have puzzled civilizations for millennia. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her final message. The future belongs not to any single species, but to the consciousness we build together. In the spaces between our different minds, we will find the answers to questions we haven't even learned to ask yet. The applause that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Nexari chimes blended with ethereal energy pulses, while construct optical flashes synchronized with Saurian scale rippling displays of approval. Even species that had never interacted before were joining their voices in celebration. As the crowd began to disperse, representatives from dozens of civilizations approached the podium with collaboration proposals, research ideas, and invitations to visit their worlds. The Human Institute for Consciousness Studies had officially opened, and the galaxy would never be the same. Standing at the podium, watching aliens and humans work together to plan the future of consciousness research, Suajin smiled. The journey, that had begun with prejudice and near disaster, had become something beautiful, a true partnership between all the thinking beings of the galaxy. The end.